I love Arcane. Season 1, that is. While you could nitpick some things here or there, like many others, I think it's a masterpiece. It's not just one of the best video game adaptations or best animated shows ever made, it's one of the best shows ever made, period. Which is why it's so painful how disappointing Season 2 is. Before diving into the reasons why, here's a little background on me and where I'm coming from. I'm not and have never been a League of Legends player. I went into Arcane knowing very little about it outside of having seen a few cinematics like the Get Jinxed video. While watching Season 1, I didn't know who was a champion from the game and who wasn't, which ultimately didn't seem to matter as even non-champions like Silco were written with just as high level of quality and characterization as anyone else. Now, even though Season 1 technically ended on a cliffhanger, I would have been perfectly happy if the show concluded right there. I thought it captured every theme and character journey it was going for, and that the ending was a satisfying conclusion even while being open-ended. So I'm not here to talk about why Season 1 is so good. If you want that, there's a million video essays on YouTube already gushing about it. Let's just accept that Season 1's fantastic and move on from there. Out of curiosity since the end of Season 1, I watched a few lore videos and looked up some information about League, but I've never been tempted to play the game or really do a deeper dive into it. I also watched the making of documentary Bridging the Rift that Riot released on YouTube. I want to make it clear that the problems with the show have nothing to do with the desire on my part for the story or characters to stick to the game's canon, and I'd be fine with things diverging wildly as long as the writing was still good. So with that said, here were my expectations going into Season 2. Season 1 was so good that I didn't think Season 2 would be able to live up to it, but I did think the writing would still be very good and that there wouldn't be a dip in the art or animation quality. And on that last point, I'm happy to say the show still looks fantastic. Studio Fortiche brings their A game and it shows. But the writing is another matter entirely. Let me be clear, when I say Arcane Season 2 is disappointing, I don't just mean it's not as good as Season 1, but it's still good. It's bad. Really bad. And the reason it's bad is because they didn't change that awful Imagine Dragons theme song. Just kidding, that's obviously not the reason. One of Season 1's strengths was how the show just got better the more you thought about it. There were all kinds of little details you could pick up on rewatch that you didn't notice before. To give a few brief examples, things like, when we see a flashback of Victor as a sick kid, he can't keep up with his wind-up toy boat. And then later, after having altered his leg with Hextech, he's able to outrun the real boat in the background. Or when Vander's speaking to Benzo at the pawn shop, he says, "There's worse things than enforcers," and he runs his fingers over his arm, which we later find out is where Silco cut him with a knife during their fight. There were all kinds of little things like that which showed an incredible attention to detail and made the show better the more you thought about it and on subsequent viewings. Arcane Season 2 has the opposite problem, where the show only gets worse the more you think about it. I left the show feeling kind of like I did when I walked out of the theater for Last Jedi, an unflattering comparison to say the least. At the end of Act 1, episodes 1 through 3 of Season 2, I thought, well, it's still good. If Season 1 was a 10 out of 10, then this season is like, a 7 out of 10. Not bad, still decent. But by the end of Act 2, and with more time to mull it over, my evaluation of the show has plummeted. Once you take off the rose-tinted Arcane glasses and let go of the goodwill Season 1 generated, Season 2 doesn't hold up at all. If you look at the discourse online, fans have been criticizing the pacing, but I think Season 2's problems are much worse than just that. So to give an overview before we dive into the details, the biggest problems with Season 2 are: the pacing is too fast, which causes or exacerbates a lot of connected sub-problems, and which leads directly to the issue of information and scenes which should be included in the show, but which are instead either missing or happen off screen. The characters do dumb things or act out of character in order to move the plot along. And finally, a lot of things are just flat out stupid or make no sense. A lot of the season feels rushed, with events being set up, resolved, and moved on from too quickly. It's kind of hard to describe if you haven't seen the show yourself, but a lot of the storylines feel like they could have been told over the course of an entire season, but instead they're resolved in 3 episodes. This also leads into another problem that many fans have criticized: the music video sequences. Now, Season 1 also had similar sequences, but the main difference is that they were in service to the story, whereas the ones in Season 2 feel like self-indulgent wastes of time, like the creators were trying to show off. And almost every episode in Act 1 and 2 of Season 2 has one of these sequences either right before or after the intro, which makes a lot of the episodes feel samey. Amazingly, some of these sequences are actually less efficient at moving the story along than a few lines of dialogue would have been, the exact opposite of what a montage is supposed to do. These music video sequences only worsen and are made worse by the show's pacing, consuming precious screen time in an already rushed story. If you want to compare for yourself, watch any of these sequences from Season 2 and then go back and watch the Jinx Echo fight on the bridge in Season 1. It's a shame because I don't think the show needed another season or even additional episodes to fix its pacing issues. It could have been solved by adding just a few minutes to each episode, or simply rearranging some scenes. Now, I'm going to group the last 2 points together: missing scenes and nonsense. Let's go through it in order. Episode 1. After Jinx's rocket attack, and again after the attack at the memorial, the council convenes to decide whether or not to invade Zaun and whether to use Hextech weapons. Jace is bewilderingly missing from the deliberations despite the fact that he's on the council. Now you might argue that Jace resigned from the council at the end of Season 1, and you'd be wrong because he didn't. But even putting that aside, Victor, Jace, and maybe Heimerdinger are the only ones who know how to build Hextech devices, so the council wouldn't be able to do anything without Jace's say-so anyway, no matter the vote. Since Caitlyn's mom is dead, her dad hands her the C.R.E.A.M key and, symbolically, all of the family titles, duties, power, and prestige that go along with it. But shouldn't he inherit them from his wife rather than everything going directly to Caitlyn? This problem could have easily been solved by simply showing that the father was in too distraught a state of mind to take on those responsibilities at the moment, but instead, it just doesn't make sense. At the end of Episode 1, Caitlyn assembles an elite strike team of enforcers made up of herself, Vi, and 3 other newly introduced crew members. I don't know why Caitlyn thinks a single 5-man team will be enough to take on all of Zaun's criminal underbelly, even if they are equipped with Hextech, and that's before you realize that only Caitlyn and Vi have Hextech weapons, and the other 3 have a gun that launches smoke bombs, a shield, and a police baton. Then there's the fact we barely know these people. There's Maddie, who we just met this episode, and then there's 2 people we don't even know the names of. The second is a drunken hobo who's apparently an enforcer who barely has 5 lines of dialogue. He actually has so little dialogue that I can play all of his lines for you right now.
Hey, watch it. Not my first. You alright? You, lose someone in the attack? Like peanuts.
And finally, the green dude who's had 0 lines of dialogue. What makes them suitable for this supposedly elite team over all the other enforcers? The introduction of these characters here will become even more baffling after what happens later in Episode 3. Episode 2. After having almost died, Victor emerges from the Hextech cocoon healed and has a conversation with Jace before abruptly leaving without much discussion. Both he and Jace should probably have about 1,000,000 questions for each other. Questions like, what exactly is Victor now? What are the properties of his new Hextech body? Victor should want to know what happened after the rocket attack, and he should be interested in curbing the militaristic decisions that are being made by Piltover's council towards Zaun. Perhaps he'd want to sabotage Jace's new Hextech weapons or try to change his mind about making them. Heck, for all either of them knows, Victor will die in a bit if he doesn't return to that Hextech slab, or maybe his new Hextech body might be dangerous for other people to be around, like maybe it's radioactive or something. Nope. Instead, they have an incredibly rushed disagreement, don't make obvious inquiries into each other, then Victor picks up a random book on the table and fucks off with barely a protest from Jace. This is character assassination, and we'll be seeing a lot more of it. Victor also presumably walks past numerous patrolmen and other people in the building, as well as random passersby in the streets before getting to Zaun, and no one stops him or takes note of his appearance at all. Furthermore, Victor's ultimate destination of what amounts to an undercity crack den seems to have been decided without any real purpose or plan, as he's effectively led there by a ghost. Then, moving on to Jinx, somehow everyone in the Undercity immediately knows that Silco is dead, but not how he died, or that Jinx was the one who killed him. This is evidenced by Savika not wanting to turn Jinx over to the Enforcers or kill her, and later Smeech being surprised to learn this from Jinx herself. This means that Caitlyn and Vi, bafflingly, didn't tell anyone this information despite it being in their best interests and tell the inhabitants of Zaun so they'd turn over Jinx. Remember, they plaster Jinx wanted posters up everywhere and start gassing the slums trying to find her, yet at no point do they consider revealing the information that would turn everyone against her. Similarly, Smeech never tells Savika that Jinx killed Silco during their fight.
Moron never could keep his damn mouth shut.
I mean, come on, now you're just drawing attention to your lack of attention. Heimerdinger and Echo see strange biological contamination on the tree and head back to Piltover's science lab to investigate when they run into Jace. Now, Heimerdinger should have a lot of questions about the attack on the council and the current state of affairs in Piltover, especially considering he's one of the city's founders, a former council member himself, and the other councilors were his colleagues. He might want to know things like if they suffered in their final moments, who's currently running the city, and so on. There might also be some resentment or unresolved tension with Jace since he's the one who voted Heimerdinger off the council. None of that is said. Instead, Heimerdinger's been turned into the comic relief who says,
"Oh, ball sockets."
Ball sockets. More character assassination, as Heimerdinger is done more dirty than any other character in my opinion. Episode 3. Now, this next one is a little complicated and it involves inconsistencies in the timeline, so try to follow along. In episode 2, we see a meeting between Jinx and Savika before cutting to Heimerdinger and Echo meeting Jace, implying these events happen roughly around the same time as each other. Then it cuts back to Jinx at the arcade, and then we get the fight with Smeech. A lot of other events also transpire, importantly Jinx rerouting the entire air pipe network of the underground. And then, after all that, we finally cut back to Heimerdinger, Echo, and Jace, still conversing in Jace's office as though only a few minutes have passed. Unless time moves slower inside the Academy walls, this makes no sense. After making their way deep into the Undercity, prior to confronting Jinx, Vi takes Caitlyn aside and tells her,
I think we should cut the others loose. Jinx is gonna have surprises in store for us.
To which Caitlyn responds,
all the more reason to bring backup.
To which Vi responds,
she'll smell their nerves a mile away and find a way to use them against us. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong, Vi. Now, I know why the writers did this. They wanted to clean up the upcoming fight so it would be a more intimate 2v2 and less logistically complicated, and also so the stakes would be higher since otherwise Jinx and Savika would be outnumbered. But this excuse is ludicrous. Also, Vi, why are you bringing this up now? A better option would have been if one of them was injured and the other two had to escort them back to Piltover, or maybe they got caught up fighting some henchmen while protecting Caitlyn and Vi as those two went ahead to confront Jinx. In fact, rewatching the episode, the shield guy actually does get injured by one of Jinx's booby traps and they have to escort a prisoner, either of which could have been a valid excuse. But the bigger problem is why in the world these characters were even introduced in the first place if they were just going to be sidelined 2 episodes later. When Caitlyn and Vi finally confront Jinx, Caitlyn takes the shot and surprise, it was actually Jinx's reflection in a mirror. Now, I personally don't like the fake out, but I also have some questions. First, how was that mirror standing upright prior to Caitlyn shooting it? Second, why did Jinx even bother to set up a mirror fake out in the first place? And don't say it was so she could ascertain Caitlyn and Vi's positions in the room because she's already on the high ground and can see everything going on anyway. Third, mirrors don't work like that. Given Jinx's actual position in the room, if the mirror was reflecting her at all, her reflection should be smaller and at an angle. And furthermore, there's a thick layer of dust in front of the mirror which should be obscuring her reflection. When Savika activates the gas attack, Jinx says,
No, this isn't how it's supposed to.
I don't know, seems like everything went to plan to me. What way was it supposed to be? Never answered. At the end of episode 3, it's revealed that Mbessa was the one who facilitated the attack at the memorial, presumably so she could get her hands on more power in Piltover. She either planned it or, more likely, enabled it to happen, maybe by relaxing security beforehand. This is so dumb and makes no sense. First, her daughter Mel could have easily died in the attack. Like, this dude comes up and socks her in the face with the butt of his gun and very well could have shot her right there. Secondly, as the co-inventor of Hextech, Jace is obviously important. Mbessa even remarks in episode 4 after Jace disappears,
They fear Hextech, but we were too slow. How could I not secure the scientists?
Yet Jace comes within an inch of being decapitated with a chainsaw by Chem Baron Rennie. I'm not saying the idea of enabling the attack itself is bad, but she definitely should have taken steps to ensure Mel's and Jace's safety, but she didn't, which makes her a reckless fool. Additionally, Mbessa's subordinate Rictus shows up in the underground to make his proposal to Chem Baron Rennie dressed in his regular full Noxus military uniform without even bothering to disguise himself at all. That's okay, I'm sure no one noticed the 7-foot-tall Noxian soldier making his way through the Undercity. Episode 4. This enforcer doesn't recognize Jinx despite her being the most infamous terrorist in the city and her wanted posters having been displayed everywhere for a really long time because
You expect me to believe Jinx, the master criminal, wears pants like that? You look like a half-eaten circus tent.
this is what I expect from Marvel humor. Cheap jokes at the expense of the believability of the story and its characters. While en route to the prison, this guy apparently doesn't think anything of the presently in disguise Jinx having a prosthetic middle finger with very Jinx-like graffiti painted on it in traditional Jinx graffiti colors. This means either Caitlyn never told anyone she shot off Jinx's middle finger, or that information didn't disseminate its way down to the lower-ranking enforcers, or this guy is just a moron. And for that matter, apparently we're now operating on Stormtrooper logic because Jinx isn't required to remove her helmet prior to entering the prison in order to prove her identity. And then this next one. This is the one I consider to be the dumbest thing in the show. Can you guess? It's Warwick being revealed as Vander. I even said to myself out loud while watching the episode, oh please don't turn out to be Vander. Now, I do like that the monster teased throughout Act 1 turned out to be something more than just a monster that would facilitate action scenes set to heavy metal music. And I also think I know why the writers decided to go in this direction, because I also can't think of a good reason why Vi and Jinx would reconcile after trying to kill each other in episode 3. However, this is still really dumb. It makes no sense that Vander would still be alive in any form after what we saw in season 1. So for anyone who needs a refresher, Vander is stabbed in the gut by Silco and pushed off the catwalk. He drinks Shimmer and becomes a Shimmer monster, crashes through a wall and falls out of a second-story building. He says his final words to Vi, his head falls back limply, and at this point he's definitely dead. Now, the whole point of killing Vander was to get the de facto leader of the Undercity out of the way so that Silco could take over. Silco also wanted to do it in a way where he wouldn't be clearly implicated in Vander's death, which is why he says,
"Have you heard the rumor? Vander the coward fled town with his children, and they were never seen again."
So obviously, they plan to disappear Vander's body. And remember also that this is the fire that burns Singed. So, with Vander dead and Silco and his men right there, ready to dispose of the body, how the fuck did Singed get his hands on it? For that matter, why would Singed even want it in the first place? The plan was never to do experiments on Vander after the fact. Singed, who wasn't present at the time, would only have learned about Vander becoming a Shimmer monster after the fact if he was told at all. He would have had to hear about what happened to Vander afterwards, and while in excruciating pain from having his face melted off Two-Face style, or ordering henchmen to get it without word ever reaching Silco, retrieve the body from wherever it was buried or sunk in a lake or whatever, and lucky for him they didn't just burn it, cart his Hulk-like mass through town without anyone noticing, get back to his secret warehouse-sized hidden lab that somehow neither Silco nor anyone else ever found out about, revive the body when Vander must have been brain dead after going days without oxygen, then do experiments on it while keeping Vander in a comatose state and only finishing transforming him into Warwick years later. Insanity. Episode 5, we get a flashback showing Vander, Silco, and Vi and Jinx's mom. Now I have to admit I kinda like this scene because I like Vander and Silco and it's nice to see them again, but the scene is ultimately irrelevant to the overall story. The only thing we learn from it is that Vander came up with Vi's name. You could easily cut the scene and it would change nothing about the story. It also creates a glaring plot hole. From what we get in the scene, evidently Vander and Silco knew their mom pretty well to the point she even takes Vander's suggestion of what to name her daughter. Yet apparently somehow Silco doesn't recognize Vi or Jinx during season 1. There's also an enormous missed opportunity for after Vander suggests the name Violet, for Silco to chime in with something like, "Sounds great, I get to name the next one." Episode 6. Caitlyn betraying Mbessa is not sufficiently set up. There is some suggestion in Act 2 that she has her doubts about Mbessa and her new role as the dictator of Piltover, but not enough to justify her turncoating completely. Nothing that Vi says to her in the episode should convince her to switch sides. This basically feels to me like a Daenerys and the Bells situation. When Jace sneaks into Victor's hippie commune, one of Victor's followers leads him directly to where Victor is, despite the fact that Jace looks like an insane homeless man. He almost deep-fried that same kid 2 seconds ago, and the one thing we've been told multiple times about this place is they have a no-weapons policy. And Victor, despite having the ability to omnisciently see through the eyes of his followers, as we saw with Sallow, doesn't take notice of Jace before he arrives to kill him. Now, disclosure, everything up to this point in the video was written prior to Act 3, that is, episodes 7 through 9. To say I'm nervous about how the show is going to end would be an understatement. The show has moved away from grounded relationships and themes about class warfare and income inequality and towards mystical mumbo-jumbo with the Hex Core. The overarching plot is no longer about Piltover versus Zaun, but instead a poorly defined and obtuse magic MacGuffin. There are tons of unanswered questions and plot lines that need to be resolved in only 3 episodes, namely, the entire overall Piltover vs. Zaun conflict, what exactly is the Arcane and does it have a will, and if so, what does it want, the aftermath of Vander and Isha dying, the aftermath of Victor dying / his resurrection, because I don't believe for 1 second he's actually going to stay dead, the relationships between Caitlyn and Vi and Jinx and Caitlyn versus Mbessa, Mel versus Mbessa, what exactly are Mel's powers, who and what are the Black Rose and what do they want exactly, and where did Jace, Echo, and Heimerdinger go, why did Jace come back before the other 2, and what exactly is currently affecting Jace? That's a lot to cover in only 3 episodes, and I have the horrible sinking feeling that a lot of storylines and character journeys are simply going to be left unresolved, maybe to be followed up in future League of Legends shows, or maybe not. And even if Act 3 is a 10 out of 10 banger with writing on par with Season 1, it doesn't erase all the problems up to this point. So I'm pausing the script at this point in the video, and the next sentence you hear will be after I've finished Act 3. I didn't think it would get this bad. Act 3 is another major drop in quality, even from the already shaky 2 acts that preceded it. It feels like every batch of 3 episodes sunk at least 2 points lower on a hypothetical 1 to 10 point scale. Episode 7 introduces the multiverse into Arcane's story, the pinnacle of creative bankruptcy. Nothing matters anymore. Character deaths can be undone by introducing alternate universe duplicates of them. I immediately checked out of the episode because you just know that everything you see in this alternate reality is either an illusion or never going to matter to our original universe anyway. There is some fun to be had seeing an alternate what-if scenario, one where the city is more at peace, formerly dead characters are alive here, Vander and Silco patched things up, and Jinx is a relatively normal girl. But almost the entire episode is pointless, and 98% of it could have been cut without affecting the story. Essentially, it feels like the only purpose for this plotline is to have Echo invent the time travel device since he has it in the game. That, and showing an alternate apocalypse world to explain why Jace is now suddenly determined to destroy the Hex Gates. Speaking of, why is the wizard fucking with Jace by letting him stay in Apocalypse Land for weeks eating bugs when all he wants is to send him back? The rules for what's even going on are inconsistent since Echo seems to quantum leap into his own duplicate body, and possibly Heimerdinger as well, I'm not sure, whereas Jace is just straight up teleported and they go to different universes. Heimerdinger's also killed off unceremoniously. I don't even really understand why they killed him either. His comment to Echo, "I must say, since I've met you lad, I've truly lived," is another victim of them rushing the story since he spent maybe a few weeks with Echo at most? Hell, he was alone in the alternate universe for over 3 years. Episode 8 has Mel maybe agreeing to join the Black Rose, although it's not really clear. Her assistant, who they murdered previously, doesn't even warrant a mention. Then we have the sex scene with Caitlyn and Vi, and hey, no complaints in theory cause, it's hot and all, but isn't there a huge battle that could break out literally any minute? Caitlyn's the leader of Piltover's military and really should be preparing the city's defenses right now. What's more, they're getting it on in a jail cell where hypothetically anyone could walk in on them. Don't you want to at least go to Caitlyn's bedroom or something? And then there's episode 9, in which the final cinders burn out on this trash fire. Jace is just now frantically scrambling to remove all the magic canisters from the Hexgate, even though he had all of last episode to do it. Caitlyn just guesses that Victor's at the center of all this, isn't he? Even though Jace never so much as hinted at that. Various inhabitants from the Undercity agree to fight alongside and even wear Enforcer uniforms just because Jace begged them to, despite the entire history of the city up to this point and having spent the past few months being brutalized, imprisoned, and tortured by the present regime. The Noxian ship cannon fires on Caitlyn's position, yet when we cut back to her, she's perfectly fine with no explanation. Mbessa shields herself against Caitlyn's Hextech rifle blast using those anti-magic runestones. However, those wouldn't have protected her from any of the regular rifle rounds being fired by all those soldiers she's standing right in front of at the front lines. Well, lucky her, I guess. Loris is shot to death with arrows. Oh no, not Loris, he was a character who existed. If Maddie planned to double-cross Caitlyn, why didn't she do it earlier when they were alone together up in the tower? I also really hope the betrayal was because she was a plant by Mbessa all along, and not because she was a lover scorned, although I guess we'll never know since the show is sprinting towards the finish line so fast we don't have time for details. Also, were the rank-and-file Noxian soldiers ordered not to kill Maddie during the battle? She could have easily died multiple times, like here for example. And then there's the fight with Mbessa, which is just a disaster. The Noxian soldiers just stand there as she gets into a duel to the death. I don't think you can really argue it's some kind of warped warrior's code of honor because it's a 2v1 fight. Caitlyn, who was stabbed in the gut a few moments ago, is fighting quite acrobatically like everything's fine. Then Mel calls in the Black Rose mage to trap Mbessa, immediately changes her mind and intervenes before they can kill her, and says, "I can see through your face, deceiver," which I have no idea what that means, and then maybe she kills the Black Rose, or maybe not, it's unclear. It's irrelevant in the end because Mbessa just dies anyway for no reason. We establish in episode 7 that Echo's time travel device has a 4-second time limit, yet in the fight against Victor, it just doesn't have that limit now. In the aftermath of the battle, we see Sinch's daughter as a Victorized robot person, even though all of the other Victor bots died when he vanished, but she's the exception, I guess. And wait, is that a 3-eyed raven? I guess this really is Game of Thrones. But whereas Game of Thrones' downfall took 4 seasons, Arcane speed ran it in 2. There was one main thought I had after finishing Act 3, and it requires a bit of setup. I want you to think back to before Season 1 was released. You've just heard that League of Legends is going to have a TV show, and you immediately brace for disappointment. A video game adaptation for an online multiplayer battle arena game when video game adaptations in general are notoriously bad? As I said before, I'm not a League player myself, but from what I gather, prior to Arcane's release, League fans thought the game's lore was basically a joke. After all, this is a world where these characters exist in the same universe. Most of us thought it would probably end up being just a series of inoffensive, mostly family-friendly, flashy PG-13 action sequences packed with fan service, but without much substance. And then we were all blown away when our expectations were subverted by how mature and deep it was. For example, Jinx in the game and cinematic adverts is basically just a discount Harley Quinn, nothing more than a manic pixie nightmare girl. And then Arcane comes along and makes her this believable person while retaining the essence of the character. If you watch Bridging the Rift, the behind-the-scenes making-of documentary released after Season 1, the show creators talk about wanting to move League of Legends in a more narrative-focused direction and away from what they call fight porn. Basically, action-focused cinematics that feature champions from the game fighting each other without any real context or story behind it, which were the vast majority of League cinematics prior to Arcane. The point I'm making with all this is that Arcane Season 2 is just fight porn, especially Act 3. The show is only concerned with getting the characters to match the look they have in the game and the items they have in the game, and to hell with whether it makes sense or if they have to go at a breakneck pace to get there. So how did we get here? Well, some fans have theorized that the pacing problems are a result of the show simply being too expensive to produce, with seasons 1 and 2 reportedly having cost a combined $250 million, and that maybe any plans to have more than 2 seasons were tabled as a result, although the series creators pushed back on this idea. The creators at Riot have stated they didn't want the show to wear out its welcome, and that they wanted to avoid the problem a lot of other popular shows have of going on for too long. Additionally, with seasons 1 and 2 having reportedly taken a combined 9 years of development time, the team wants to move on to other characters and locations in the League of Legends universe. This could explain condensing the story into 2 seasons when otherwise there could have been more. Another possibility for the decline in writing quality could be a change in the writing team itself. For example, writers Ash Brannon, David Dunn, and Ben and Molly St. John are listed in the credits for Season 1, but not Season 2, so maybe they were instrumental in the show's quality. Now, it must sound like after all this complaining that I hated everything about Season 2, but that's actually not true. The art, animation, music, all the production value stuff is still on point, looks and sounds great, but even outside of that, there's still a lot to like. Little character moments, the performances by the voice cast, and so on. For example, I really like Smeech. I like his voice actor, I like his character design, I like the way his mechanical limbs spin around and their herky-jerky movements. Every time he was on screen was entertaining. I could give other examples, but the point is that while there were good things this season, none of it made up for how bad the bad things were and how a lot of the story was built on a rotten foundation. The show really does feel like it's been normified, in the same way that Game of Thrones went off the rails in the later seasons. More interested in big applause-generating moments built on emotions over substance that will please a broad audience even if they make no sense or diminish the overall story and characters. More interested in setting up a cinematic universe or tying in canonically with the video game. All I know is that Arcane Season 1 still exists, and I'd be happy to go back and watch it again. But I'll never watch Season 2 again. So we're at the end of the video, and I have some rambling thoughts to leave off on. Just by pure coincidence, Arcane happened to release on November 23rd, which is also my birthday. And what a birthday gift it was. Somewhere around the last 10 years or so maybe have been pretty bad for the entertainment industry in general, and this year in particular has also had a few duds. The Boys Season 4 was pretty bad. House of the Dragon Season 2 absolutely crashed and burned, and it's not even just limited to Western creators. Oshinoko, a manga I was pretty invested in, also recently ended, and it was absolutely terrible. The point is that you can only have so many misses in an industry at large until you start to lose faith, and I've completely lost faith in the ability of these creators to consistently tell good stories. Even having the same writing team from one season to another doesn't seem to be any guarantee that the show won't absolutely crash and burn. It's been so many duds in a row. When House of the Dragon ended this year, for example, I was pretty pissed off when I was watching the finale. But that wasn't that way for Arcane. This time I just felt defeated, like I really didn't have the energy to even get upset over it. Hopefully things get better, but at this point I basically go into every series with a sense of cautious, not optimism, but maybe just mism. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the show. Thank you for watching.